I'm in Lime Street Station in Liverpool, watching the trains go out. Millions of people all over the world travel by rail, but the story of the railways really began in Britain. And Liverpool, where I am now, played a very important part in that story. The first mainline passenger railway with steam trains in the world was built from Liverpool, on the left here, to Manchester, 31 miles away. It was built by George Stephenson nearly 150 years ago. Well, that's a long time ago. I wonder if there's anything left of that early Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Anything that would tell us how the railway was built, or what it was like to travel on the railway in those days. Well, let's go along the Liverpool and Manchester line and see if we can find any clues. Liverpool's first passenger station wasn't in fact at Lime Street, but at Crown Street. The station was down this deep cutting. Today it's deserted and empty, except for the rubbish that people have thrown in. You might just be able to spot where the railway lines used to be. I wonder how many people who live and work or go to school near here know about the old station. Through those tunnels, the goods wagons used to go down to the docks. This is a picture of the same view when the station was first in use. Here's the view the other way today, looking towards Manchester. This is how it looked on the opening day. Then you'd have heard the noise of the engines and the chatter of excited people as they came down the steps to buy their tickets for Manchester. There are still some clues left which show that it was a station. The station steps are still there. And here are the old ticket offices and waiting rooms. It'd be hard to get rid of them because they're cut out of solid rock, as you can tell if you look up at the ceiling here. Even the fireplaces are cut into the rock. And outside here's the little iron chimney which took the smoke away. So although the station's no longer used, you can still find clues to the past. But what happened to the old locomotives? Well, here's the Lion, one of the early locomotives used on the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Today you can see it in the Liverpool Museum, painted again in the railway's old colours, yellow and black. It's very different, isn't it, from the locomotive we saw coming in Lime Street Station. In the first place, it's much smaller. Though remember that a locomotive like this would go much faster than a coach pulled by horses, which was the other way people travelled at this time. A second difference is that a driver of an early locomotive like this one didn't have much protection from the weather. And a third difference is that this is a steam engine. A coal fire down here boiled the water to make steam, and steam from the boiler here drove the wheels round. What about the passengers? Well, in the early days they didn't have a platform, and to get in the coach or carriage you would have to climb up steps like these. This was a second-class coach, so it wasn't very comfortable. The passengers would have to stand up, and there isn't even a roof to protect them from the weather. At first, there were no third-class carriages on this line. This is a first-class coach. You can see now why we talk about railway coaches or carriages, because the first ones, like this one, were made just like the coaches or carriages which were pulled by horses. If you could afford to travel first class, like the people in here, then your journey would be much more comfortable than by second class. Even so, there's not much room in here, and the passengers' luggage would have to be carried on the roof outside, just as it was on the coaches which were pulled by horses. And this is where the guard would sit, in just the same position as he would have done on a horse-drawn coach. Going out of Liverpool, Olive Mount is probably the first part of the railway you really notice. To keep the railway level, George Stephenson had to cut through solid rock. The cutting is nearly 2 miles long and 70 feet deep. This picture was drawn while the cutting was being made. It was very hard work for the men, who only had picks and shovels, just as you can see here. The cutting has been widened since then, but even today the trains look very small as they go through Olive Mount cutting. Now we're coming up to Rainhill, one of the most famous parts of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. This is where they held a competition to see which was the best kind of locomotive to use on the railway. Very few people had seen a locomotive before, so crowds came to see the competition. Which locomotive won? This one, Stephenson's famous rocket. It can still be seen in the London Science Museum. This is what the line looked like at Rainhill when it was first built. You can see that it hasn't changed much. The bridge still has George Stephenson's name on it. The modern notice on the platform reminds us that Rainhill is where the competition was held and that it was won by Stephenson's rocket. Further along the line, Stephenson had to take the railway across a valley with the Sankey Canal running through it. He built this huge bridge or viaduct. No one before had built a railway viaduct as high or as long as this one. He built it so well that it's still used today, even though modern trains are very much heavier and faster than the trains for which it was built. Well, what about the line itself? The sleepers, the blocks that a railway line rests on, usually have been made from wood, and the latest ones are made of concrete. But what were the first sleepers like along this line? You've seen a locomotive in the museum, which has been carefully preserved, but it's been much harder to find either any of the rails that the locomotive ran on or the sleepers that the rails rested on. Now, from the train I spotted what I think must be one and another one here and one behind of the original sleepers on which the rails rested from the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. It's a very, very dangerous spot, this. This is why I'm wearing this brightly coloured vest, and I've had to get special permission to come down here to examine these more closely. These sleepers are made from stone, and they're very, very big and heavy. Here are the bolt holes, here and here, and there's one way to test it. I've got a piece of the original here, LMR, the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. If I put that against the holes, a bit of stick, put them in here, and another piece in here, that fits nicely. This is a piece of the rail which slots in there, so that it looks, doesn't it, as if that is one of the original sleepers on which the tracks rested. There used to be a station a little further along at Parkside. Now only the steps down to the line are still there. How quiet it is today. This is a sad place. On the opening day, the locomotives stopped here at Parkside to get water for their boilers. Some passengers got out to stretch their legs. People, of course, weren't used to the speed of engines. One passenger, William Huskisson, a Member of Parliament for Liverpool, panicked as an engine came towards him. Look out! He was knocked down and he died from his injuries. This stone memorial beside the line marks the place where he was run over. You can see his name, William Huskisson, and the rest of the writing explains what happened to him. The memorial was put there to remind people who travel along the line of what happened. The land around here is getting flatter. We're coming to an area called Chat Moss, but building a railway across flat land can still be difficult, as you'll see. This is where George Stephenson faced one of his biggest problems. This is Chat Moss, an area of marshland which stretches all the way around here, and Stephenson had to build a railway line across it. You can see what the problem was. Anything as heavy as a railway line would just sink in ground as marshy as this is. Well, at the time, many people said that George Stephenson would never build a railway line across Chat Moss, but he did, and I'll try to explain to you how he managed to do it. Anything heavy, like stone, sinks, but wood doesn't. So he built a thick platform of hurdles, like this, of brushwood, and even of heather, and on top of the platform, he built the railway line. Here's an old picture of how it was done. The men sometimes even had to strap boards to their boots to stop them sinking into the marshy ground as they worked. On each side of the railway line, he dug a ditch to drain the water away. This old picture shows you how the railway track was built up above the marshy land. Even today, the ground shakes like a jelly when a train goes by. Look what happens to this bottle of water, which I spotted by the line. Now we're coming into Manchester. But this train isn't going to arrive at the first station built in Manchester. The railway used to end at Liverpool Road Station. This old picture shows you how it used to look. The station's still here today. A notice has been put above the doorway to remind people that this was the first station to be built in Manchester. This is the grand staircase which led up to the railway line. The trains came in here. Today it's used as a goods yard. The old station clock used to be here on the wall. This is where you would have bought your ticket. I've even found the old station bell. It was rung to warn passengers when a train was coming in. Look how the railway line goes very close to the pillars that hold up the station roof. I'm sure that in the old days, when passengers tried to get out, some wouldn't have been able to because their door would have been jammed against a pillar. You see, this was one of the first passenger stations in the world, and they hadn't worked out the best way to build them. So that was once the end of the line for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. Today, of course, the Liverpool trains arrive in Manchester Victoria Station or Manchester Piccadilly Station. Well, that's the story of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, but remember that every railway has a story. The next time you travel by train, why don't you make a note of any clues that you see? Clues like bridges, or tunnels, or stations, or railway signs. And then try and find what story they tell.